The debris field smelled like burnt metal and old radiation. Not that Darren Cole could smell it through the hull of his ship, but he had been doing this long enough that he imagined he could. 6 months alone in deep space does strange things to a person. His ship, a cutter-class salvage vessel he called the Gravel Queen, moved slowly through the wreckage of what used to be Voral Station. The station had gone dark 8 months ago. Nobody knew exactly why. The Accord had sent a survey team, filed a report, and then decided the debris field was too unstable for a full recovery mission. That made it legal salvage territory. That made it Darren's business. He ate a cold protein bar at the controls and watched his scanner work through the field piece by piece. Most of what he found was the usual bent hull plating, fused wiring clusters, broken storage pods, things that could be sold for parts at any frontier station. He tagged each one and kept moving. Then the scanner beeped. Not the soft double beep of a tagged piece of scrap. This was a sharp single tone, a distress signal, old, looping, and buried so deep inside an interference pocket that it had probably been pinging for months without anyone picking it up. Darren set down the protein bar and pulled up the source coordinates. The signal was coming from a science pod, Accord branded, wedged between two large hull sections about 40 meters off his port side. The pod was intact except for one corner, which had been crumpled like paper by something heavy. He suited up and went out to get it. The pod was about the size of a ground vehicle, sealed with 3 external locks and covered in the kind of warning markings that research teams put on things they want other people to leave alone. Yellow stripes, red triangles, a line of text in 6 different languages that all said some version of restricted biological containment. Do not open without authorization. Darren looked at the warnings for a few seconds. He was not authorized. He opened it anyway. The interior was dark and cold. Most of the power cells had died. Emergency lighting gave everything a faint blue glow. He swept his light around and found the usual research pod layout: storage brackets, instrument panels, and in the center of the floor, a containment crate. It was a heavy thing, built from layered composite material, with seals along all 4 edges and a digital lock on the front that was currently showing a flat red error light because the power was gone. The crate had a crack in the upper right corner, not a big one, maybe 3 centimeters wide. Darren crouched beside it and looked at the crack. Something had hit the pod hard enough to deform the crate slightly. The seal along the top edge had separated just a little from the pressure. He read the label on the front of the crate. It said Specimen V9 Omega, do not approach without containment protocol active. Category Omega Fauna. Darren did not know what Category Omega meant. He had a field guide for xenofauna on his scanner, but he had never needed anything past Category 3. He made a note to look it up later. He put his hand on the crate to check the temperature. Something inside the crate moved. He pulled his hand back. The crate shifted slightly. He heard a sound through his suit, low and odd, somewhere between a growl and a buzzing vibration. Then silence. Darren thought about this for a moment. The crate was cracked but still closed. The creature inside had apparently been in a cold, powerless container for an unknown number of months. Whatever it was still alive, which was remarkable. What it was doing, pressed against the crack and making that sound, he could not tell. He reached over and broke the deadlock housing off with a pry bar. The seals popped. He lifted the lid. What came out was fast. Not fast in the way a frightened animal is fast. Fast in the way that makes your brain skip a frame, and suddenly the thing is somewhere it was not a half second ago. It hit the interior wall of the pod, something cracked, and then it dropped to the floor and stood there. Darren stood very still. The creature was low to the ground, about knee height, with a body built like a barrel, wide, dense, and close to the floor. Its back was covered in dark scales that overlapped like tiles, each one with a faint sheen to it. It had 6 legs, all short and thick, ending in claws that had punched 3 separate marks into the composite wall when it hit. Running from the base of its skull down its spine to the tip of its tail was a stripe, bioluminescent, currently pulsing a deep, angry red. It had a broad, flat head, small eyes that caught the blue emergency light and reflected it back, and a jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to make a point about what jaws were capable of. It looked at Darren. Darren looked at it. The red stripe pulsed twice, then it slowed down slightly. Darren reached into the chest pocket of his suit and pulled out the second half of his protein bar. He held it out, not close, just out. The creature lowered its head slightly. The stripe pulsed again. Then it moved forward, slow this time, and sniffed the protein bar from a safe distance. Then it ate it out of his hand, quickly and completely, without biting the hand. Then it sat down. The stripe was still red, but slower now, almost like breathing. "All right," Darren said to himself in the empty blue-lit pod. "You're strange. I've been alone for 6 months. You're in." He got the crate back to the Gravel Queen using a cargo line. The creature rode inside the pod, not in the crate. It followed him to the airlock at a distance of about 2 meters, which he decided was a good sign. Once aboard, he ran his scanner over it. The scanner produced a reading, then flagged 7 of its own data fields as outside normal parameters, and suggested he contact the Accord Xenofauna database. He did a manual search instead and found one partial match, buried in a supplemental field guide section labeled VORRHA9 Fauna High Danger, Do Not Approach, Do Not Feed, Do Not Make Eye Contact. He had already done 2 of those 3 things. The creature had meanwhile walked through the crew area, smelled every surface, and then located the co-pilot seat. It looked at the seat for a moment, and then began to systematically remove the padding from the frame. It was not destructive about this. It was methodical. It stacked the padding in the corner and arranged it into something that looked very much like a nest. Then it lay down in the frame of the seat and tucked its head against its own side. The red stripe dimmed to a low amber. Darren watched this happen. He looked at the wreckage of his co-pilot's seat. He looked at the creature, which was now asleep. He looked back at the seat. He pulled a second instrument panel from storage and began figuring out how to reroute his secondary controls so he could still fly the ship. "Bricks," he said while he worked, because the creature had hit the wall like one. "That's your name now." Bricks did not respond. Bricks was asleep. The Gravel Queen turned slowly in the debris field and pointed its nose toward the nearest Accord station, 3 jumps away. Darren had a hold full of salvage to sell and apparently a passenger. He filed a new manifest entry under cargo. Species unknown, condition alive, temperament unclear. He thought about it for a moment, then added one more word. Friendly. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a busy place when something walks into it that nobody expected. Not silence. The noise does not actually stop. People keep moving, machines keep humming, ships keep venting coolant into the docking bay atmosphere. But every person in the area suddenly starts paying attention to the same thing at the same time, and the result feels like silence even though it is not. That was the quiet that fell over docking bay 7 of Accord Frontier Station, a Ren 4, when Darren Cole walked down his boarding ramp with Bricks riding on his left shoulder. Darren had not planned for Bricks to be on his shoulder. It had simply happened that morning when he was reviewing his sales manifest. Bricks had climbed up his arm with calm and total confidence, settled against the side of his neck, and gone still. The bioluminescent stripe was a steady amber. Darren had decided not to argue about it. So he walked off the ramp with roughly 48 kilograms of scale-backed alien predator draped over him like a very large and dangerous scarf, and the docking bay went into that particular not silence. The port staff closest to the ramp took several steps backward. A cargo loader operator stopped his machine mid-turn. A Velhari customs officer, tall and four-armed, had her scanner out and held in front of her before Darren had taken 3 steps off the ramp. "Sir," she said, keeping the scanner between herself and Bricks the way people use clipboards when they want to feel safer than they are. "That creature on your person, I need to scan it." "Go ahead," Darren said. She did. The scanner read for about 4 seconds, produced a long string of data, and then its alert light turned red, and it made a sound that Darren had never heard a scanner make before. A high, insistent beep that kept going. The scanner caught fire. Not dramatically, just a small pop, a curl of smoke from the side panel, and then the officer was holding a ruined scanner and staring at it. Bricks had not moved. Bricks had not done anything. The scanner was simply old, and its power cell had given up at an extremely poor moment. None of this mattered. The timing was what it was. The silent alarm went out 12 seconds later. Darren found this out because 2 minutes after that, 6 Accord security officers arrived in full containment gear, heavy suits, full-face shields, pulse batons at their hips, and carrying something that looked like an industrial-grade stasis net. Behind them came Director Sale, head of the Accord's Containment and Threat Bureau. He was a Velhari, like most of the administrative class here, tall and deliberate, with the practiced expression of a person who has dealt with many problems and expects this to be another one. Behind Sale was a shorter figure in a research coat carrying a data pad and walking fast. Darren did not know this one yet. He would. Sale looked at Darren, then at Bricks, then at Darren again. "Sir," he said, "the creature currently on your shoulder has been classified as Category Omega Xenofauna under Accord Biological Regulation Statute 14. It is illegal to transport, illegal to possess, and has been formally declared impossible to safely contain following a 14-month study by Accord Research Division 7. Darren let that sit for a moment. "He seems fine," he said. Bricks churned. It was a low sound, more felt than heard, like a small engine running at idle. "It killed 11 containment drones," Sale said. Darren looked at Bricks. Bricks looked at the security officers with the expression of something that had not yet decided whether to be interested. "Did they try protein bars?" Darren asked. Sale stared at him. The security team began to move into a containment circle. They spread out slowly, professionally, keeping their distance while they positioned themselves on all sides. Bricks watched them do this. The amber stripe stayed amber. Darren kept still. The team leader signaled. 2 officers raised the stasis net. Bricks moved. Later, when Darren tried to describe what happened, the best he could say was that Bricks was somewhere, and then Bricks was somewhere else, and the space between those 2 moments did not seem to contain any actual travel. One of the officers with the net was suddenly on the floor because the net was no longer in his hands, and something had gone through the center of the containment circle at a height of about half a meter, and had not slowed down at all. 2 officers had venom spray in their visors, not enough to penetrate, but enough to blind them through the polycarbon until they wiped it clear. A pulse baton skittered across the deck in 3 pieces. A riot shield had 4 parallel claw marks down the front of it that went through the material. Bricks was back on Darren's shoulder. The whole thing had taken 11 seconds. Darren gently put one hand over Bricks's eyes. "Easy, easy. These are just people being foolish. You're all right." The security team stood in their broken circle, breathing hard, looking at a creature that had gone through all 6 of them and come back to the same spot without a mark on it. Sale had not moved from where he was standing. To his credit, his expression had not changed much either. "You need to come with us," he said. "Sure," Darren said. "Bricks comes too, though. I think we've established that." The research coat figure had been writing notes the entire time. He looked up, caught Darren's eye, and gave him a small and deeply excited nod. They were taken to a holding lounge in the administrative wing, a clean, neutral room with seating for about 12, currently empty except for the three of them. Sale told them to wait and left two guards outside the door, which Darren thought was either very brave or very optimistic. The research coat figure sat down across from Darren and placed his data pad on the table between them. His name was Dr. Fenwick, and he was the Accord's senior xenobiologist, and he had the manner of a person who has just been handed something he has been waiting for his entire professional life. "Do you know what you have?" Fenwick asked. He said it quietly, the way people say things when they want to make sure the weight lands correctly. Darren looked at Brix, who had climbed off his shoulder and was now methodically inspecting the seam where the wall met the floor. "A pet, apparently," Darren said. Fenwick opened his data pad. "The creature is native to Vora 9. It is, by every biological measure we have, one of the most physically resilient organisms ever cataloged in Accord territory. The skin structure alone took 4 papers to describe properly. The venom is a compound we still do not fully understand. The neurological recovery rate from sedatives is, well, the study team called it insulting, and I think that is actually the right word. And the council wants to take him from me," Darren said. "The council wants to contain it," Fenwick said carefully, "which is different, in theory." Brix had found something interesting in the wall seam. He nosed at it, then lost interest and came back to sit on Darren's boot. "He chose to stay with me," Darren said. "I opened the crate. I fed him. He's been on my ship for 12 days. He helps me find faults in the hull. I don't know how. He just goes and sits next to the bad panels. He doesn't hurt anything unless something threatens him." Fenwick wrote something on his pad. "You said he," Fenwick noted. "He seems like a he," Darren said. Fenwick wrote that down too. Outside the holding lounge, Councillor Orvath had arrived. He was a senior delegate of the Accord, Velhari, and the kind of person who treated every room he walked into as a formal occasion. He reviewed the security incident report, looked at the footage, and formally opened an investigation into Darren Cole, private contractor, for illegal possession, illegal transport, and resisting Accord containment procedures. He had not yet met Brix in person. That was going to go poorly for his sense of dignity, but that came later. For now, inside the holding lounge, Darren scratched the back of Brix's head just behind the bioluminescent stripe. Brix made the churring sound and went still, leaning slightly into the scratch. Fenwick stared at this for a long time with the expression of a scientist who has just watched something impossible happen and is trying to decide what to write down first. "I have been studying this species remotely for 6 years, he finally said, "and I have never once seen it do that." "Do what?" Darren asked. Fenwick pointed at Brix. "Relax." The Accord Research and Containment Facility had a room that nobody had used for anything since the incident 3 years prior, when a research team tried to study a deep ocean predator from the Korath system, and the predator studied them right back through several walls. The room had been reinforced after that, and then reinforced again, and it sat at the end of a long corridor behind 2 blast doors that required separate authorization codes. They put Darren and Brix in the lounge next to it. The lounge was actually comfortable. Softer chairs than the holding room, a food dispenser that worked, windows that looked out onto the facility's inner courtyard. Darren got the sense that someone had realized very quickly that Brix was not going into the reinforced room, and that making Darren's living situation better was the best available alternative. A full containment wing had been quietly assigned to the Brix situation, which Darren found out because Fenwick told him everything, apparently unable to help himself. On the second day, Director Sale came with a team of 4 and a new containment approach. A localized stasis field projector mounted on a wheeled frame, range of about 4 meters, designed for large and aggressive fauna. It had worked on a sand crawler from Yarrel 6, which was previously the most resilient creature in the Accord's records. Sale gave Darren a formal warning that they were going to proceed with containment. Darren said, "Okay, I'd recommend against it, though. Sale proceeded anyway. Brix did not stay in the stasis field. The projector managed to lock onto him for approximately 1.5 seconds before he simply walked out of the field perimeter at an angle that should not have worked given the projector's coverage area. The field team argued later about whether he had found a gap in the projection, or whether he had moved too fast for the field to update its lock. The footage was inconclusive. What was conclusive was that Brix had walked out of a stasis field, sniffed the projector with apparent curiosity, and then gone back to the couch where Darren was sitting and settled onto his lap. Sale filed the incident report and then stood in the corridor outside for a while. On the third day, Counselor Orvath convened an emergency panel. He had reviewed the original 14-month study in full and arrived at the meeting with a prepared position. Brix was a weapons-grade biological entity. Darren was an accessory to a serious Accord violation, and the fastest resolution was to declare the situation a biosecurity emergency, which would allow the Accord to override standard civilian protections. Fenwick was also at the panel. He had a data pad and a presentation ready, and he had clearly not slept. Orvath presented the case for emergency classification. He was very organized about it. Then Sale presented the containment record. He presented it in the same way a person describes a medical problem to a doctor carefully without showing how much it had cost him. 11 drones, 6 officers in docking bay 7, a stasis projector. Each attempt noted, each outcome noted. Then Fenwick said, "May I?" He pulled up the original study files, all 14 months of them. Specimen V9 Omega had been captured on Vora 9 after a standard survey team had accidentally triggered what the logs described as a territorial response. The survey team had entered a nest area they had not identified as one because the species does not build nests in a way that standard survey protocols recognize as a nest. They had set up equipment in the middle of it. Then they had panicked when the family group responded and had called for an emergency extract. During the extract, there had been a containment discharge, standard procedure for keeping fauna back during an emergency liftoff. The discharge had killed the family group. One juvenile had survived because it had been away from the nest area when the discharge fired. The survey team had captured it during the confusion and brought it back as a specimen. "How old was it?" Darren asked. He was sitting against the back wall of the panel room. He had been quiet until now. Fenwick checked his data. Estimated age at capture, 4 months. Vora 9 maturity cycle is approximately 18 months, so it was not yet 1/3 of the way to adult development. Darren was quiet. "They took a 4-month-old," he said. "Yes," Fenwick said. "After killing its family." The discharge was not intended to. "After killing its family," Darren said again. Not loudly, not aggressively, just very clearly. The room did not produce any useful response to that. Fenwick continued. The specimen had been in containment for 14 months. During that time, it had destroyed 11 drones, metabolized 3 different sedative compounds at rates that increased each time, as if its body was learning to process them faster. Survived exposure to hard vacuum during an airlock malfunction, walked away from a plasma torch incident that had been authorized by 2 separate safety committees, and been fired at 40 times normal gravitational force in a reinforced mining pod, and had emerged from the pod visibly irritated. "What did they try?" Darren said slowly. "That actually worked." Fenwick hesitated. "Nothing worked long-term." "What worked at all?" Another pause, longer. During the 14th month, one of the research assistants, a junior member of the team actually, sat outside the containment barrier during a feeding cycle and talked to the specimen for about an hour. The specimen did not attack the barrier during that session. It was the only session in 14 months where that happened. The panel room held this information. "Was the assistant called to give evidence?" Darren asked. She left the project shortly after. The lead researchers concluded the incident was anomalous. Orvath had been increasingly still throughout this. He spoke now. The creature is still a Category Omega entity regardless of. You orphaned him, Darren said, and then you put him in a box for 14 months, and you poked him with things and fired him out of cannons, and you couldn't understand why he was angry. He looked at Brix, who was sitting on the chair beside him with the stripe at a low amber. He wasn't aggressive. He was alone. The room was quiet for a while. Orvath said, "The classification still stands." Fenwick said, quietly, "I'd like to add one more piece of data before any vote on classification." He pulled up a second file, more recent, run in the past 3 days during the time Brix had been in the facility lounge with Darren. It was a genetic analysis. The species designation for Vora 9 fauna of this type was flagged in an old Accord historical database, not the current Xenofauna registry, but the historical survey archive from over 1,000 years ago, before the Accord had its current structure. In those old records, the species was listed under a different name. The word translated roughly as keeper. In the old survey logs from the early explorer era, keepers had been noted as creatures that bonded to exploration teams and functioned as navigators, as early warning systems, as companion animals for crews operating in dangerous territory. There were accounts in the historical records of crews surviving situations that should have been fatal because their keeper had detected a hazard before any instrument had. The knowledge had been lost when that era of exploration had ended. The species had been assumed to no longer exist. He was not waiting to be contained, Fenwick said. He was waiting to be found. Orvath left the panel session early. Darren did not say anything else. He did not need to. He just sat with Brix in the chair beside him while Fenwick submitted his formal request to have the genetic findings entered into the official record. Later, walking back to the lounge, Darren stopped at a dispenser and bought a protein bar. He broke it in half. He ate one half. He gave the other to Brix. Brix ate it without drama. The stripe was amber, steady and slow like a pulse, like something that had been running too fast for a very long time had finally been allowed to slow down. That evening, Darren filed a formal request with the Accord Civilian Welfare Office. He requested that Brix be reclassified from Category Omega Containment Target to Registered Emotional Support Animal under Accord Civilian Welfare Statute 7, Clause 12. He had looked up the statute 3 days ago in the holding lounge on the station on the night they had arrived. He had been thorough about it. He had noted every requirement, every supporting condition, every piece of qualifying language. He had been planning this since Docking Bay 7. Director Sale received a copy of the filing notification at exactly the same moment he was trying to authorize a fourth containment approach. He read it. He set his authorization form down. He sat at his desk for a while. Then he went to get something to drink, because some days in the Accord's Containment and Threat Bureau were longer than others, and this one had been going on for 3 days, and he was beginning to suspect it was not close to over. The Accord Council did not move quickly. This was, in fairness, by design. Rapid decisions made without proper process were how the Accord had gotten into at least 4 major intergalactic incidents in the past century, and the institutional memory of those incidents had calcified into a culture of deliberation that was very good at preventing panic and very bad at resolving things before lunch. So the Council deliberated. They could not contain Brix alone. Every attempt had already confirmed this. They could not charge Darren without formally addressing the Accord's own role in the origin of the situation, which several members of the Council found uncomfortable enough to want to avoid. They could not release Brix into the general station population, which had about 3,000 inhabitants and a reasonable expectation of not encountering Category Omega fauna in the commissary. The deadlock looked like it might last weeks. Lieutenant Rue was assigned to watch Darren and Brix. This was not presented to her as a punishment. It was presented as a security posting. She was professional, efficient, and had a record that did not have a single negative note in it. Her supervisor had chosen her because she would not do anything rash, and because she would not be intimidated, and because if something went wrong, she was the most likely person in the building to handle it correctly. She reported to the lounge on the fourth morning, in full uniform, and introduced herself to Darren with exactly as many words as the introduction required and no additional ones. Then she positioned herself near the door, standing, and made it clear by her posture that she was not there to make friends. Darren said, "There's a food dispenser. The coffee is bad, but it's real." Rue said, "I'm fine." She was not fine. The coffee was real and she had been awake since early that morning doing threat assessment reading on bricks, and her eyes felt like sand. But she was not going to say that. Bricks had been sitting on the couch across the room since she arrived, watching her. Not in the way a dangerous animal watches something it is deciding whether to attack. In a different way. Patient. Considered. An hour into the posting, Bricks got up. Rue went very still. Bricks walked across the room at an unhurried pace, stopping about half a meter from her boots. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. His bioluminescent stripe was amber. She had read the incident reports, which described the red stripe state in words that made her glad she had not been in Docking Bay 7 that day. Amber was not red. Bricks sniffed her right boot, then her left. He raised his head slightly, and something in his expression shifted, not readable, not like a human or even like most aliens she had encountered, but something that felt like a conclusion being reached. Then he turned around and walked back to the couch and curled into the seat cushion and went to sleep. Darren, who had been watching this from the table where he was reviewing salvage contracts, said, "He likes you." Rue kept her face very professional. "That is not reassuring." "He tried to bite the last 3 officers who came near him," Darren said. "That is also not reassuring." "Sure it is. He knows a capable person when he smells one." Rue looked at Bricks, who was asleep. She looked at Darren, who had turned back to his contracts. She made a very small mental note and did not write it down anywhere because she was not sure what to do with it yet. On day 5 of the posting, at approximately the 11th hour of the station's cycle, 3 things happened at almost the same time. First, a faulty regulator in Docking Bay 3's coolant system cracked open without warning. Coolant vapor under pressure does not behave well in enclosed spaces. It billows. It gets into everything. And this particular compound was not immediately lethal but was toxic enough that sustained exposure, more than 20 minutes, started doing permanent damage to biological tissue. Bay 3 had a maintenance crew working a late shift. 2 Velhari technicians and 1 human engineer. A woman named Bet who had been at the station for 9 years and knew where every access panel was. Second, the structural damage from the rupture caused a secondary collapse, 2 ceiling support struts, and about 40 meters of overhead equipment rail came down in a cascade across the bay floor. It buried the exit. It was not an avalanche. It was messier equipment at different heights falling in different directions, piling and crossing and locking together in ways that would take a structural calculation to untangle. Third, Accord Emergency Response dispatched containment drones to manage the vapor and a rescue drone cluster to begin debris clearing. The rescue drones took one look at the structural configuration and began calculating the safe disassembly sequence. Estimated clearance time, 42 minutes. The trapped crew had maybe 15. Darren heard the alert tone from across the lounge. He was on his feet before the second tone completed, pulling up the bay schematic on his scanner. Rue was already at her comms unit, getting the same information through official channels. Bricks was off the couch. He was not looking at Darren and he was not looking at Rue. He was looking at the door and the amber stripe had shifted not to red, but to something brighter than it normally ran. A sharper amber. focused. Rue, Darren said. She turned. Brix was already moving to the door in the way he moved when he had made a decision, not fast yet, but with the absolute certainty of something that knew where it was going and had no interest in being redirected. Rue looked at Darren, he looked at her. I can't stop him, he said plainly, not if he's decided. She processed this for approximately 2 seconds, then she opened the door. What happened in Bay 3 over the next 6 minutes was observed by 2 emergency response officers and recorded by 3 separate facility cameras, and the recordings were subsequently reviewed many times by many people, and none of them fully agreed on how to describe what they had seen. Brix entered the bay and stopped. He did not approach the debris. He stood at the edge of it and did something with his body, lowering his head, shifting his weight, all 6 claws spread flat on the deck that looked like listening, or feeling, something the humans in the room didn't have a word for. Then he moved. He went to a specific point in the debris pile, not the largest piece, not the most obvious one, not the one the rescue drones had flagged as the primary obstruction, and he put his claws into a gap that most of the observers had not even noticed was there. He pulled. The piece moved. 3 other pieces that had been balanced against it shifted, and when they shifted they opened a gap in a completely different part of the pile, about 4 meters away. He went to that gap. He widened it. Something above it settled instead of falling, because he had taken a specific piece away that was the load point for everything above it. He did this 5 more times, each time in a different place, each time opening or relieving something somewhere else. The pile was not a random mess to him. It was a system, and he was reading it. On the 7th move, the path was open. Bet came out first because she knew the layout and she was not waiting. The 2 Velhari followed. All 3 were coughing from the vapor exposure. All 3 were walking without help, and all 3 were going to be fine. Total time from when Brix entered the bay, 6 minutes. One of the Velhari technicians turned around and saw Brix sitting in the exit he had just made. She produced a sound that was not quite a scream but was in that neighborhood. Darren, who had come into the bay behind Brix, said, "He's fine. Go get medical." The technician went and got medical. Rue stood next to the debris pile for a moment, looking at the path through it. Then she looked at Brix, who had left the bay and was now back at Darren's side. Stripe returned to its normal amber. She had her report to write. She looked at what the rescue drones were still calculating. They had not yet reached a recommended first move, and she looked at the 6-minute path that Brix had opened through something the drones were going to spend 42 minutes on. She pulled out her report form. Under incident type, she wrote, Structural Obstruction, Bay 3. Under resolution, she wrote, Assisted Rescue, Civilian Asset. Not uncontrolled predator, not biological hazard, not Category Omega Fauna Incident. Civilian Asset. She submitted the report and walked back to the lounge without saying anything about it. Darren noticed. He did not mention it. He gave her a small nod across the room. She did not nod back. But she did not nod back either, which was something. On the couch, Brix curled back into his cushion. The stripe went soft, amber, slow, steady. The Accord's rescue drones finished their calculation sequence at the 40-minute mark and dispatched their first asset to the bay, which by then had been fully cleared and cleaned. The drones found nothing to do and returned to their station. Their calculation report was filed, marked complete and archived. Nobody read it. The Accord Grand Council chamber on our Ren 4 was not the most impressive room in Accord space, but it was trying. High ceiling, curved walls, tiered seating for 20 delegates, a central floor area with a podium, and lighting that had been calibrated to make whoever was speaking look important. There was a large display behind the podium that could show evidence, data, historical records, or simply the Accord seal if the session needed to feel official. The session called by Councillor Orvath had all 20 seats filled. This was unusual. Most sessions ran with a quorum of 8. 20 meant something, and what it meant here was that word had gotten around, and everyone wanted to see how this ended. Orvath opened the session with the formal charge structure. His voice was measured and precise, and he had clearly practiced the presentation because he moved through it without hesitation. Illegal transport of Category Omega xenofauna, illegal possession, interference with containment operations, resisting Accord security procedure. He had it organized chronologically, and each charge had a reference number and a supporting citation. It was a very good presentation. Orvath was good at presentations. Darren sat in the public gallery area with Brix on the seat beside him. Brix had been given his own seat by an administrative assistant who had assessed the alternative options and decided a seat was easier. Brix sat in it the way he sat in most places, low, dense, taking up less room than his actual mass should have allowed, watching the room. The gallery was full. Several dozen station personnel, a handful of researchers, 2 journalists from the Accord press office. Everyone was watching the central floor. After Orvath, Director Sale was called to present the containment record. He did this with the same care he always brought to his work, methodical, factual, no editorializing. He listed each attempt. He listed each outcome. He did not try to minimize how the outcomes had gone, which took a certain kind of honesty, and the room respected it even if nobody said so. 11 drones, 6 officers in Docking Bay 7, a stasis projector, various other attempts in the facility. Each one noted, each one showing the same result. The creature was not contained and Darren Cole had been cooperative but unmoved. Then Sale listed the Bay 3 incident. He read from Rue's report, which he had received the night before and read 3 times. He read the 6-minute figure. He read the 42-minute rescue drone estimate. He read the outcome. 3 crew members recovered, no casualties, no injuries beyond vapor exposure that was already resolving. He read the incident type as Rue had filed it. Assisted rescue, civilian asset. He sat down. Orvath stood again. Regardless of the Bay 3 incident, the classification. "I'd like to call Lieutenant Rue," Fenwick said from the research delegation area. Orvath looked at Fenwick. Fenwick met his look with the particular patience of a scientist who has the data and knows he has the data, and is willing to wait as long as necessary for the other person to let him present it. Rue was called. She walked to the podium with the same posture she brought to everything, straight, measured, not performing authority but carrying it naturally. She had not changed or prepared anything additional. She read directly from her incident report. She did not embellish. She did not editorialize. She did not use dramatic language or pause for effect. She stated the configuration of the debris field. She stated the vapor toxicity exposure timeline. She stated the number of crew trapped and their physical condition. She stated the actions taken in order and the time each action took. She stated that the creature had navigated a collapsed structural debris field without instrumentation and had identified load-bearing removal points in a sequence that any structural engineer, reviewing the footage, would have to call correct. She stated that the creature had cleared the obstruction in 6 minutes when the mechanical estimate was 42, and the crew's safe exposure window was 15. She stated that the creature had not harmed the rescued crew, had not harmed any bystander, had moved when its handler's attention shifted toward the emergency, and had returned to the handler's side when the task was complete. She said, "It responded to its handler's attention and moved to assist. That is what the record shows." Orvath, it is still an unregistered Category Omega entity, and the charges against. Rue, it was reclassified this morning, sir. The room went quiet. The Civilian Welfare Office processed the filing overnight. Emotional support animal, Statute 7, Clause 12. The paperwork cleared at approximately the 3rd hour of today's cycle. She looked at her notes. Roughly 40 minutes before you opened this session. Orvath was very still. In the gallery, two of the journalists were writing very fast. Then Fenwick stood and asked to present new evidence, and the chair allowed it because at this point the session had already gone somewhere nobody had planned for, and the chair was curious. Fenwick's second finding was genetic. It was not new data. It was very old data, recovered from the Historical Survey Archive, cross-referenced against the fresh genetic sequencing he had run on bricks over the past 5 days. The species had a name in the archive, a name given by the earliest Accord explorers in the era before the current Accord structure existed, when small crews in basic ships had gone into unmapped space with nothing but experience and nerve to keep them alive. They had called this species the Keepers. The records were fragmented but consistent. Crews that had keepers with them survived at measurably higher rates than crews that did not. The creatures had been noted as navigators, as threat detection systems, as companions. One record, over 1,400 years old, described a keeper guiding its crew out of an unmapped debris field in complete communications blackout, leading them through a route that post-mission analysis showed was the only viable path. The crew had not known what the keeper was doing until they were safe. The species had been classified as extinct when the early exploration era ended, and survey techniques became more mechanical. The last record of a living specimen was over 900 years old. Until Darren Cole opened a cracked containment crate in a debris field near the ruins of Voral Station. The chamber was very quiet. Darren spoke from the gallery. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He just said it the way he said most things plainly, because the plain version was the right one. You declared the species extinct. You declared this one unstoppable. You spent 14 months trying to break him after you orphaned him, and the whole time he was just waiting for someone to bring him home. Nobody in the chamber had a useful response to that. The vote was called. The Accords process required it to be formal, and formal it was, but the result was not close. Brix was to be formally registered as a civilian companion animal under Statute 7, Clause 12, with an additional research notation from Fenwick's office. Darren Cole was cleared of all charges. The original Vora 9 survey incident was to be formally reviewed by an independent committee, which was Accord language for "this was our mistake, and we would rather examine it carefully than say so directly." But it was something. A formal apology regarding the capture and containment period was drafted. It was written in careful language by someone in the communications office who understood that the Accord was apologizing for 14 months of failed violence against a grieving juvenile, and that this needed to be stated without being stated quite that directly. Orvath left the chamber when the vote result was read. He did not comment, and he did not look at the gallery on his way out. Brix watched him leave. The stripe pulsed once, a single slow pulse of red that spread from skull to tail and then faded, then amber again, steady. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, Sale found Darren. The corridor was clearing out, delegates and staff moving past them in both directions. Sale stood in the middle of the corridor and waited until Darren noticed him, and then he just said it. "How did you know? When you first opened that crate in the pod, how did you know it wouldn't kill you?" Darren adjusted Brix slightly on his shoulder. He thought about lying or deflecting or giving an answer that sounded better than the truth. He had the habit of doing that sometimes. He did not do it this time. "I didn't," he said. Sale waited. "He was scared," Darren said, "and alone, and I was also both of those things. I thought that was probably enough to start with." Sale looked at Brix. Brix looked at Sale. The stripe was amber. Sale nodded once very slightly, then he walked away. Darren watched him go. Then he scratched behind Brix's ears, at the spot behind the stripe that made Brix go still and heavy in content. "Come on," he said. "Let's go figure out what they're going to do with our ship." Brix chirred once and settled. They walked down the corridor together, and the people who saw them coming moved aside, and the people who moved aside watched them go. And there was not a single person in that corridor who could have explained exactly what they had just witnessed without talking about it for a long time afterward. 6 weeks after the vote, the Gravel Queen was 2 jumps out from its next job and moving through a stretch of empty space that had no name on any Accord chart because nobody had needed to name it yet. The stars out here were not the stars you saw near stations or trade lanes. Out here they were just stars, no nav buoys, no signal traffic, no other ships on the passive scanner for about 800,000 kilometers in any direction. Darren liked it this way. He was at the pilot console, working through a systems check, annotating his salvage manifest for the new contract. The Accord had sent him the recommendation themselves, which still felt odd, because until 3 months ago the Accord had mostly sent him things like, "Your docking fee is overdue," and "Please respond to this notice within 30 days." Now they sent him contract recommendations that said things like, "Potential xenofauna activity in sector, requesting experienced handler assessment, and prior knowledge of non-standard biological systems preferred." He was still getting used to that. Brix was in the co-pilot area. The co-pilot area had been rebuilt 3 times since Brix had come aboard the Gravel Queen. The first time because Brix had dismantled the original seat. The second time because Darren's first rebuild had not accounted for the fact that Brix liked to press his back against things. The third time, Darren had spent 2 days with the ship's schematics and a lot of spare composite material, and had built something that was structurally sound enough to handle Brix shifting his weight without the frame loosening, and cushioned enough that Brix had accepted it immediately, and settled into it like it had always been there. The stripe was amber, had been amber for 3 weeks solid, longest calm run since they had left Arren 4. 3 weeks ago, the Gravel Queen had made its first jump out from Arren 4 after everything was settled, paperwork processed, ship released from temporary impound, new manifest logged with the Accord registry that included 1 registered companion animal, species, Vora 9 designation, Brix handler. D. Cole and Brix had done something Darren had not expected. When the jump drive engaged and the familiar lurch of faster-than-light transit hit the ship, Brix had gone to the viewport in the crew area. He had stood there for the duration of the transit, which was about 40 seconds, watching the non-space outside the window. When they came out the other side into normal space, into the clear and the dark and the spread of stars in a new sector, Brix had stood at the viewport for another minute or 2. Then the stripe had gone amber. Not the stressed amber of the containment facility, where amber just meant not currently active. The real amber, the slow one, the one that moved like breathing. Darren had not said anything. He had gone back to the console and let the moment be what it was. 1,400 years of a species being forgotten. 14 months in a box. And then, one day, deep space again, the stars moving outside a viewport, and whatever feeling passes for relief in something that has no word for relief. The comm system chimed. Darren checked the sender, Lieutenant Rue. He answered. "Rue," he said. Cole, a pause. Her comm style had not changed, efficient, no unnecessary warmth. "I'm checking in, protocol." Darren looked at the sender code for her new posting. She had transferred 2 weeks after the vote to a frontier survey unit operating 4 sectors out from Arren 4. She had not explained the transfer, and he had not asked. But she had messaged every 6 days since, framing it each time as protocol, and he chose not to point out that he was not actually required to check in with anyone anymore. "Brix's stripe has been amber for 22 days straight," he said. A short silence on the line, then good. "He found a faulty sensor cluster yesterday. Went and sat next to it until I checked it. The casing had been cracking from the inside, pressure differential in the housing. Another week and it would have failed mid-jump." "Good," she said again, a slightly different tone on the second one. "How's the frontier unit?" Fine, we had a close pass on something biological 2 days ago. Nothing confirmed yet. A brief pause. I've been reading Fenwick's papers, the old records, about the Keeper cruise. Darren waited. The early survey logs, she said. Some of those crews were out for 2 years with no contact, no backup, nothing between them and whatever was out there. Yeah. They came home, she said, just that. Yeah, Darren said. She ended the call with the same efficiency she always used. No goodbye, just a disconnection. He had stopped being surprised by it. He looked over at Brix, who had opened one eye during the call and was now watching him with the particular attention he sometimes used when Darren had a conversation that went a certain way. She's fine, Darren told him. Brix closed the eye and settled. An hour later, a message came through from Fenwick. No call, just text, because Fenwick had apparently decided that Darren responded better to things he could read at his own pace, which was true. Fenwick was observant that way. The message said, Accord has approved a Vora 9 survey expedition. First surface contact mission to the planet in over 300 years, planning for a 12-month deployment. We would like to formally invite you and Brix as primary field consultants. This is not an order, a request, or a condition of anything. You can say no. I am asking because I think you should say yes, but I am aware that you make your own decisions and that Brix's position on the matter will carry significant weight. Please consider it. Darren read it twice. Then he set the scanner down on the console edge. Vora 9. The Twin Moon World. The place where the Keepers had come from, the place where the family group had been, the place where everything had started in a way that nobody had planned and that had gone very badly for a very long time before it started going differently. He looked at Brix. Brix was already looking at him. Not with urgency, not with the bright stripe of the Bay 3 incident or the tense amber of the containment facility, just looking. The way he sometimes looked when he had reached a conclusion before Darren had finished thinking. Darren started typing a reply. He did not write much. Fenwick knew what a yes looked like without needing a paragraph around it. He wrote, "We'll be there. Tell me the timeline." He sent it. Outside the viewport, the unnamed stars of the unmapped sector moved past in the slow way that they move when you are going somewhere. Not fast. Not urgent, just continuous, the way things that are going the right direction tend to feel. The ship's cycle moved into night mode, dimming the internal lights and shifting the crew area to the lower illumination that Darren slept better in. He finished his manifest notes, powered down the secondary console, and went to the bunk area. He lay down without changing much this deep in a transit leg. He slept in his working clothes more often than not. Brix got up from the co-pilot nest. Darren heard the soft sound of claws on the deck, moving from the front of the ship toward the bunk. He did not look up. He left one arm hanging off the side of the bunk. The movement stopped beside it. Brix put his head down on Darren's hanging hand and went still. All 6 legs tucked, body dense and warm and quiet. The bioluminescent stripe put out just enough light to be visible in the dark, amber, slow, the rhythm of something that had been running hard for a long time and had finally found a place to stop. Neither of them moved. The Gravel Queen held its heading, steady and patient, carrying them both through the dark between stars toward whatever came next. The Accord had 17 volumes of documentation, proving the creature was impossible to contain, impossible to manage, and impossible to stop. Darren Cole had a protein bar and a habit of talking to things that did not talk back. In the end, it was not even close.